Hi everyone. Today we're going to take a look at handling web page data, and then we're also going to get a start on our internet interview. So let's go through the notes first. Okay, so when we want to access data from our web page using JavaScript, we're going to go through a couple of different examples of what that looks like and how we can do that. One of them is if we have an HTML element that is a checkbox. We'll show you some of that today on our internet interview page, right? But if you have a checkbox, right, you can click to see if it's been checked or not, right? And so that is an attribute or a property called .checked, okay? So how do we determine if it's been checked or not, right? Well, we're going to start by saying, okay, in this document, find an element with an ID of check ID. So document.getElementById. What's the ID of your checkbox? Now, it may not always be check ID, right? You can change IDs to whatever you want them to be. Okay. And then you say .checked. So this is the attribute that I want, right? And the .check property is going to give you a Boolean. It's either true if it's checked or false if it's not. And so the result of this, right, that Boolean, right, being true or false, that gets stored into this variable is checked, okay? Now, this is for one specific type of HTML element, the checkbox, right? But this is the basic format that we use for accessing web page data for any of our HTML elements, okay? So, for example, here we're going to talk about a drop-down menu or a select box, right? So for something like this code here shows it broken down into two separate lines of code. You don't have to do it this way, okay? You could go document.getElementById and just go .value, all right? So that whatever the result of that would be, right, from that select box would save into whatever variable you have, okay? Now, for something like a text box, this is something we've already talked about, right? It is, again, just the .value. Okay, so again, in this document, look for something with an ID of name ID, right? We specifically want its value attribute or property, and whatever that value is, right? Remember, that's what's typed into the text box, right? That is going to be a string in terms of the data type. We'll talk about data types in a second. Right? That is a string. That string that is the value gets stored into this variable name. Okay, so again, this is the kind of flow, right? Document.getElementById, write the ID dot, what's the property, what's the thing I'm trying to change or get from the web page. Okay, so let's talk about data types, okay? So 3 examples here. Determine the value of sum for the following example. So in example 1, I have a string of 5, followed by this variable second, which is a string of just 7. And then sum is first plus second. So when you're talking about strings, remember this is called concatenating, when you are putting one string with another. So sum would just be the string 5, 7. Okay. Example 2, if I don't have the quotes here, then it's not a string. These are now numbers. So the plus symbol here does not mean concatenate. It will do numerical addition, and it will give us 12. Okay. And now example 3 is something I want you to mess around with yourself, right? Talk to the people around you, or you can go ahead and try to do this yourself in one of the files that we have. In one of the JavaScript functions, you can just run this real quick, and instead of console.log, you could just alert sum or window.alert sum. What happens when you add a string and a number? That's something I want you to mess around with yourself and see what happens. The results are a little interesting when you have different types of data. Okay, that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. Okay, now let's talk about parsing. Okay, there is a function we can use called parseInt. What it does is you put your string here in the parentheses for the function, and what it'll do is it'll take that string argument. Remember, what we send into a function is called the argument, and it will return the integer value. Okay, so on the last slide, example 1, right, we had 2 strings instead of 2 numbers, right? Well, what I could do is I could say, okay, first is going to be quote 5. But if I go parse int first, I can go ahead then and replace first with that. That will turn it into the number 5. Same thing with the the string 7. I can parse into that variable and then overwrite that variable with the returned integer value from that string. And now if I add them together, right, it would give me 12. Okay, so parse int is good for integers. There's also parse float. Parse float is nice because it works even if your number doesn't have a decimal point. Okay, so in this example, right, I have two strings here, 3.14, 2.57. If I want numerical addition, right, I would parse float them, and then I would add them together to get the correct value of sum. Okay, last thing, right, looking at just overall, if I'm using the plus symbol and I'm talking about strings, remember that is called concatenating or concatenation, right? Chicken space pot plus space pie, add it all together, gives me one string chicken pot pie. String 5 plus string 7 gives you a string 57. String 3.14 plus string 2.57 gives you this fun looking number in a string. Okay, when you're dealing with integers and floating point numbers, right, then we're just talking numerical addition. Okay, parse int or parse float when you need to switch your string to a number. Okay, all right, so we're going to come back to these ideas. You're going to do a little bit of this in our internet interview. Okay, for now though, let's go ahead and take a look at the description for that assignment. Okay, so first off, it talks about submission guidelines. So there's two things you're going to submit for this. Number one is a PDF printout of the website. We'll talk about that in a couple of days. And then a PDF printout of your .html code. Remember that you want to make sure you have the print extension installed in your VS Code. Then you'll see this printer icon on the top right. Okay, so we'll talk about this as we get closer to it. So what are we doing here, right? The goal here is to make a web page that you're going to have somebody in your family, any adult that's at home. It could be mom, dad. If you have an older sibling who's an adult, that's fine. But they're closer in age to you. It's more interesting if it's a parent, aunt, uncle, grandparent, somebody like that. Okay, you're gonna have them do a little survey. You're gonna basically conduct an interview, right? Asking them about their experience with the internet. Okay, so we're gonna have a heading. We're gonna have some text. You're gonna find an appropriate image online. You're going to get some basic info from them. What's their name? What's the first year you access the internet? And now remember, what goes in this box, right, is a number, but remember it's a text box, so this is going to be considered a string. So this is where we're going to need to use that parse int, parse float to turn this into a number, because we're going to do a little bit of math with this at the end. Okay. Part 2, we're going to ask some basic questions. Right? Briefly describe what you remember from your first experience with the internet. Okay. And then you're going to have them check off, right, which of the following activities you think have improved or become easier since the invention of the internet. So however many, right, they say. And then when you click submit, right, we're going to see a summary of everything that they responded with, right? So their name, how long they've been on the internet, how long their response was, how many things they checked off, and that tells them what the impact the internet has had on their life. Okay, so we're going to create this. Okay, so let's go back to the description. All right, and part 1 talks about HTML structure. Now there's a lot of stuff we have to set up here. I'm not going to go line by line and code it all with you. I have it typed out, but we'll talk about some of the things that show up. Okay, so create an H1 tag, create a P tag, right? And if you're like, I don't know what to put in the inner HTML for those tags, you can base it off of this output summary here, okay? So you can put this in the H1 tag, you can put this in the P tag, right? That's what we're going off of, okay? Insert an image. So let's go take a look at that real quick, okay? So here's what I have so far. HTML, right? In my heading, I just have the title, okay? In the body, right? So again, for the H1 tag, adult internet interview, right? And then here's the P tag, okay? And whoops, there is misspelled. Let's go ahead and fix that. There we go. All right. And now for my image, oh, I should show you. I've already done this, right? Here's mine. Okay. So this is what mine looks like. Now you're going to notice that stylistically they look different, right? It's because I don't have any style in my head tag. Okay. But that's okay, right? Well, we can talk a little bit of style at the end as well. All right. So, you know, I have it all set up here. Okay. I want to talk about the image real quick. Something interesting I noticed, again, you guys know how much I love VS Code. Okay. When I'm writing the source, right? So when you write the name of the subfolder, so where this file is saved on my computer, I have a folder there as well called images / and when I do that, it automatically pulls up the files that are in that folder, which is really nice, right? Because now I can just see that, hey, this is the one I want, and I can hit enter. I don't have to type anything out. Okay. So that's kind of nice. That should be happening with yours as well. Okay. Oh, also just something kind of interesting to note. Inside of this P tag, I have a BR here, right? I have a line break that shows up, right? So that this second sentence, right, is on a separate line than this first sentence. That's just a stylistic choice. You don't have to do something like that, right? But if you want to, you can put line breaks wherever you want. I could put another line break right here if I wanted to, right? And now if I go back and run it, right, now I have a third line. Okay, so you know, these are the stylistic choices you can make that ultimately don't have an effect on how your web page is going to work. Okay, let's go back to the description, right? Insert some spacing, right? So remember, in VS Code, I can put as many enters as I want here. This won't have any effect on my web page. If I want spacing, I have to use line breaks, right? The BR tags in my code, okay? And so from there, I have header, basic info, right? And now I want some text to go before the text box. So I write first name and then the text box for their first name. I gave it an ID as well because I know I'm going to need to grab info from this text box later on. Couple of line breaks, last name, here's the text box for that. Again, a unique ID. Couple of line breaks, first year you accessed the internet, another text box, another unique ID for that. Okay, and so that gets us through here. Okay, right, and so on my web page, that gets me through this part, the basic info. Okay, remember everything in the text box that goes away when I start typing, that's the placeholder attribute. So if my first name is, let's say my first name is student is my last name. I accessed the internet in 1997, right? So all that gets overwritten, right, is the placeholder text. Okay. Couple of line breaks separating stuff out. I have another heading for questions, right? And now briefly describe what you remember from your first experience with the internet, and a line break followed by a new HTML element for us called a text area. I give it an ID. I give it placeholder text. What makes a text area interesting though is that it's basically a big text box where you can specify the specific size, rows and columns. So a regular text box, input type equals text, has a standard size that you can, I actually don't know if you can change it or not. I bet you can, I just don't know how. But for text area, right, you can customize how many rows and columns I want this box to be. And then also with the text area, you can grab the bottom right corner, click, and drag your mouse. And on your web page, you can actually resize it on the fly. You can add more rows or columns, things like that. Okay. Okay. So there's all of that, and now I get to all of my checkboxes. So input, right? Type equals checkbox. So you'll see I have an ID on all of these as well. I have a value as well. Now remember, for the input tag, there is no closing input tag. So when I'm looking at all of this text to the right of my checkbox, this is not inner HTML, right? This is just text that I have written after the greater than sign, right? And then I have a BR and I start another input. Okay, so there's nothing kind of like associating this text with this checkbox. Okay, it just happens to be the text that I put there. I could have put text before the checkbox as well, but that wouldn't have looked right. Okay, and then you can check a whole bunch of them. Okay, and then at the bottom here, what else do I have? So I have a whole bunch of checkboxes, and again, you're like, huh, where's the text for all these coming from? Right? You can look back at the description or the output, and you can grab all of the text from there. Okay. At the bottom, I have a button to submit. Right? I'm going to call a function later on. This is not needed right now for part 1. Okay, and then I have a div down here as well with nothing in its inner HTML. So this is where I'm going to put the summary of the responses from the survey. Okay, so that should take us all the way through part 1. All right, so we're gonna stop right here. Okay, and I will see you next time for part 2.